So this was a topic that we sort of, I was asked to moderate. And as any architect, we first start, looking at what meaning that you can derive out of these two words. So typically one tries to sort of figure out, how they can connect. And I actually found perhaps more sense in actually flipping them around. Yeah. Of flipping it around rather than talking about transformation, architecture transformation, talking about transformation architecture. And linking two words with it. One is of course transformation of architecture and transformation in architecture. And I would sort of expand on what I'm trying to understand from there. So this is really the first transformation that that I've done is that I've transformed the subject itself, and flipped it over. So we'll discuss both transformation of and in architecture, and I just probably quickly explain what I mean by that. So first, the transformation of architecture is really about factors outside of architecture, external to architecture, that begin subjecting the process of architecture to be transformed. So you're looking at really factors external to architecture, natural factors, technological advancements that sort of induce change in the way you sort of produce architecture, or it sort of gets created. Construction technology, for example, just changes the way you think of and can put architecture. And then of course cultural, political, social changes that again transform the way we understand and express architecture. So looking at natural factors, I mean the biggest thing that's going on today is the whole idea of sustainability, carbon footprint, climate change, and that is obviously has a really big impact on the way architecture is being thought of at present. Architecture at all actually transformed the way our cities grew, because it actually allowed the creation of the American suburb, because you could commute privately, and it allowed the clustering and making. It started reducing the way the whole city actually developed even. So you're looking at, of course, very high technological advancements. The whole idea of wind tunnel, we just saw a presentation with all those large facades, and none of which perhaps would have been possible if these kind of technologies were not available to, allow those kind of buildings to be built and sustained. Ideas of fire safety, and not just fire safety, but all kinds of compliances that we have now gradually sort of adhere to in any of the buildings we design, which are also in a way transforming the way architecture gets created. I mean, sometimes not necessarily for the better, where our compliances in fact almost don't allow us to make verandas in buildings or make courtyards in buildings, because they all get counted in the built-up area, and it transforms the way our architecture gets created. And we all look at the cities today and see whether we're doing the right thing, but we perhaps have something outside of architecture that's sort of boxed us into doing something which may not necessarily be the natural thing that we should be doing. So allowing for this, I mean, with the internet sort of so easily available, and this whole 2 years that we sort of had to work from home, it sort of gives you an idea of perhaps, again, induce changes in the way we think of how we live, how we work. Those kind of ideas that come in that might transform the way we sort of, and then we actually operate on a daily basis. It might transform the way our cities are structured, it might transform the way our architecture is put together. So, we can't say, there's so many factors that come in even from, way outside. Construction technology, I mean, steel, we all know the way it's sort of changed the way, what is possible with, the kind of buildings we create. The whole thing about equipment, high-speed construction, the cost of doing something, and there's one impatient capital that is coming, which pushes the way architecture needs to be done on a yesterday basis. So you suddenly start thinking differently of how you want to put buildings together, prefab. 3D printing, now we really don't know where it's going to lead us. I mean, it's something that's already possible. It perhaps is going to get cheaper and more easily available over time, and it's going to definitely transform the way we think of the way we put buildings together. Because all this is something that's going to, definitely affect us. cultural political changes. I mean, you have, sort of very top-heavy governments that make buildings of the state, and the kind of buildings that therefore emerge. You have perhaps, bottom social sort of leaning governments, welfare states that will then look at maybe social housing as the key projects that they are, that the societies sort of concentrate upon, and it changes the way, empathetic to non-empathetic architecture that comes into play in the social conscience. Aspirations of people, economic growth sort of induces that. Suddenly, you're looking at a richer nation with more money to spend. Everybody thinks that they need to have a car, they need to have. So again, the way it sort of induces transformation in the way architecture gets put out there. Gender and inclusivity. I mean, we were just discussing with friends, 20 years from now, there'll probably be, majority of architects in India are going to be female. They're going to be women. There are already more women in all the architecture, 450 colleges of architecture. Every single college, every single year in every single college is showing a majority of women in the classrooms. It's going to change in 20 years, right? So I think it will transform the way. So not only the people, women will be creating architecture. I think the clients will be more and more women receiving this. Bureaucrats. It's going to change. I mean, 20 years from now, perhaps we're going to completely have a different sort of discussion on it. Inclusivity of all kinds. I mean, and that's something I think it's even nice to see the Indian society sort of widening the way they appreciate and sort of are empathetic to everybody's sensibilities of things. So these are things that are obviously external factors that make architecture sort of get transformed. And then there's of course architecture transformation in architecture, where perhaps these external factors remain the same, and it's the game that the architect plays, in a response to perhaps specific context or a set of conditions, without the loss of identity or concept. So it's allowing for all the external factors perhaps remaining the same, but the architect is then playing his own games of spatial transformation or formal transformation or metaphorical transformation, with using dimensional or subtractive or additive sort of skills of just pure, basic design sort of games, where you can, transform the way the architecture develops. Very sort of decaying sort of. So, I mean, for two examples I just picked out, just to refer, sort of throw at the audience. One is from Alvar Aalto's work. Over a series of, over decades, he did 4 libraries. If you look at the plan of the library, you can start recognizing elements, which are similar, but he kept, transforming them every time he does the project. And the resultant buildings are all completely different. So it's really interesting, just where he's within his own practice playing games. The other architect that I picked out is Rajesh. Unfortunately, doesn't get discussed as much as perhaps he deserves. But if you look at again over time his plans, he's got this whole idea of the cuboids and the diagonal, and keeps playing with that. And and the resultants again are completely different. Just sort of emphasizing on this. So we just picked out very quickly, since I've got now maybe 90 seconds to go, 2 projects that we sort of had the opportunity to work in Bombay, where the city has transformed from an industrial sort of manufacturing city to perhaps a more services-oriented city. And so the old mills and the old docks and all that are obviously going away. And you're actually seeing, for example, within the city, where the old mill areas are all getting flattened out, and real estate is being sort of, completely, stitched in blocks of glass, coming in. We actually had the opportunity, luckily for us, I think in the studio, good clients, convinced, where we actually built one of these projects is in Fahed, which is the absolute mill area of Bombay, which is an old warehouse which somebody had converted into like a studio for MTV. It looked like a warehouse and it sort of retained. And we sort of actually started doing a study of all these surrounding context in Fahed. Has got some really nice old buildings which doesn't get talked about in the South Bombay version of what heritage means. The old KEM hospital and stuff. So we started transforming this building and then sort of actually started using similar sort of window transformations, the same stone, the same scales, trying to resist and this sort of completely converted the inside into almost like a public space that is parallel to the road outside, etc. And then just change the whole sort of warehouse into like a sort of a nice box where you have the tree in the courtyard kind of a office space. The other one was actually for Parle, the biscuits people. It's an old factory. This is like a 1940s sort of a drawing of their factory, which is like parallel to the railway tracks. And this was an old factory. They sort of don't manufacture any of the biscuits in Bombay anymore. They're everywhere else in the country. So that they sort of luckily did not want to break their sheds and modernize their campus. So we actually used the old shed, which was like almost 85 years old, and converted that into sort of now what is the Parle headquarters really. And so there was sort of very intricate sort of changes that were being made, and they transformed the whole thing into like a completely contemporary, but allowing for the inside to be still recognized as the old factory. In fact, keeping some of the boiler room spaces and their chimney spaces, and repurposing them. They are going to celebrate 100 years at the end of this decade. So this is something that we actually built this whole wall for them. So this was just very quickly. Thank you for bearing with me. I would sort of now invite Fahed to sort of continue our discussion on transformation.
Good afternoon, everyone. First off, I would like to thank RAF for this wonderful opportunity. And I think with that we'll get moving to our units. Okay. So transformation in architecture. Am I using this? So transformation in architecture, we have categorized that into different titles, and I'm straight getting to the point. First one possible approach is extending the life cycle of material. So I'm going to showcase three projects which we are working on, completed and generic work. So this is the structure. I think the proportion is a little off in presentation, but yeah. Which we have done out of completely recyclable material. So it was the divine beat. So they want to create a pavilion which is completely out of recyclable material, and so I went to the yard, looked at different materials. I found this lump fairly, this bunch of mattress springs very exciting. UAE receives 100 mattresses every day as rubbish. And they have a very beautiful extraction facility where they separate the bed springs from the spring. And I think today most of the material what we are working with, it is not this raw format. It is so frozen that there are more everything that is high, beat and brick, beat anything. So at times, getting an opportunity to work on non-standard raw material for us is very exciting. So this is some of the initial sketches, some of the models which we made, some of the renders which we have submitted. So this was a very hands-on project because we had to go to the site and resolve issues then and there. So this is the final product. It is completely made of recycled bed springs. It had a lifespan of 7 days. So it comes from the yard, then it goes back to the yard, it's compacted, and today might be part of some car or so inside that we posted different design products. That it has some temporary partitions that can be repurposed. This is another project which we completed a few years back. The first to extending the life cycle of materials by reusing it. Now with new age commerce picking up, like the Kashmir industry picked up and they have a lot of beds. So they are getting rid of the old terracotta roof tiles. So terracotta roof tiles either goes back as landfill or it's mostly landfill and no one wants it. So we got the entire roofing materials and one of my sketches is terrible because of the proportion. But yeah, with the residents. So yeah, basically use the material as another layer of insulation for the wall. And we generally in our approach to work, we try to see that most of the wealth spent on a project benefits the surrounding places rather than getting things from outside. We do end up taking things from outside, I'm not saying we don't, but we try and limit it. So for us, a good life is about living close to the ground and aspiring for the limitless. So I like this idea where it's a single-story house. Let's go back to the sketch. Predominantly, it's a single-story house where this is one wing with one bedroom, and that's another two-bedroom component connected to the courtyard. So the family, they're very open, they like people coming in, so they have neighbors who constantly visit, engage in conversations. So then I'm going to show you a video which transforms basically their life from their city life to when they shift into this house. So yeah, this is a common courtyard which can explore the wings. It's around 2,000 square feet, pets, animals. And so the Damachi of the house, she knows 4 languages. And this is about adaptive reuse. This is a project we're working on. It's an old church in the UK which is getting converted into a fine dining restaurant. Okay, so that's another approach. Then it comes to the transformation of material. I'm not sure if I'm going a little too fast. So transformation of materials, this is directly 3D printing. Now 3D printing, I believe Singapore and even UAE has a target of 25% of the building to be 3D printed by 2030, if I'm not mistaken, which is a massive initiative. It actually it completely revolutionized. There's another structure down there, and it would completely revolutionize the concept of social housing. Today, most of the social housing is a stereotype fixed plan, but with this 3D printing, the complete way you approach a drawing, the complete way you experience drawing, everything is going to change. And to make things even more complex, I'll say that the next one. Yeah, so that's our architecture, and we are working on a couple of projects which is the issue with 3D printing is still there are no uniform codes or standards. So unlike regular brick and mortar wall, so the specification part is a bit challenging. So we have to work with the university who validate the performance of the building. And this one, it's an structure obviously not done by us. It's, if I remember, it was in Amsterdam, which is completely made out of recycled plastic. So one of the printers, they, at one of the shows, some rock concert, they took the waste plastic glasses, recycled into small pellets, right there at the spot, and built furniture. So this is completely going to revolutionize the way we work. And I'm not talking of future, I'm talking of present, what's happening. So this is the last one, which actually is a little scary. Which is the strengthening of metaverse, that's a virtual world. Zahadi, Schumacher is heading this in a very, very big manner. I'm not getting into the other aspects of it, but right there. Oh, that's the last one. Okay, fine. So yeah, so this is what her day Zahadi has done in a virtual space. And with this, I'm going to conclude my presentation next for a video, which is about what life is in the earlier, the second presentation which I showed. It is about slowness. Actually, they're all in a rush. Often when young architects come to our house, their husband there is their love because you're always in a rush to do things and you just cannot rush. And I think this is a good example of slow living.
मेरे को बुखार जा रहे हैं वो देंगे तो
This is an audio which this is starting to this is not it. It's called the silent house. Rajesh is the second generation. Initially, it's not only going to space up. And it's life. So that's the 2 blocks that you see, and it's off grid. its obstacle occurs in the Kabul factory. That's all I'm after writing diaries. So the extraction of the diaries does the fun. So I'm interested in some lessons. Space for us is all about relationships, being connected, being grounded, yet aspirational. So they have their own pond, they do fishing, we go fishing there, they have our own breakfast. Thank you.
Rajesh?
Yes.
We want to see the pointer.
Yeah. It doesn't work.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to the Rajasthan Architecture Festival for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to come to Jaipur and Rajasthan. You know, it's sort of a paradise for architects, and it's always very inspirational for me when I visit this part of this country. Those were two fantastic presentations, and I think where I would sort of position myself, Salil gave a sort of a larger picture, and I think there was a lot of focus on, on the material aspect and also of slowness in Majeed's presentation. And I think what I'm going to show you is something a little bit in between, and it's looking at, in one respect, conventional sort of elements of architecture, and this idea that when we talk about transformation, it implies both continuity as well as change, because obviously it's not something is transforming itself and becoming something else. So there is an aspect which is universal and lives through time, and there is the other part which is sort of context specific and adapts to different situations. So what I'll try to do is, show through some examples of references, the kind of references that we have possibly consciously and unconsciously used in our practice, and the way in which the reference itself is sort of used in a context which is very different from where it originally came from. So there are about this is anybody just help me with this? Yeah, so some of the, looking back at our practice and some of these sort of influences, and I sort of try to, look at certain aspects. One is this idea of precinct and creating a sort of it's about placemaking and how one creates a sense of identity within a larger context. And then there's something about streets and what we call multiple scales within a building, which is there in nested nooks. And then of course this idea of deep facade and something to do with the landscape. So the first and the last have to do with more towards settlement patterns and sort of engaging with the landscape. The other three are very architectural. So an example of actually creating a space within a larger space. And in this case, it's a kind of a separation. It's a sacred precinct, and what one is doing is doing this sort of separation between what is sacred and what is profane. And by creating this strong identity, which is a combination of the architecture as well as how it is enclosed, you sort of escape from the kind of a hustle and bustle of the city, and if you move through these kind of concentric layers, you come towards something which is more enigmatic, peaceful, and sort of spiritual. But there are also other kinds of examples, like for example in Rajasthan itself, you have this idea of this little settlements towards the Barmay side, which I saw when I was traveling once, and the Dhanis, and these little clusters of houses which kind of huddle together and create this sort of an enclosure, or a sort of a walled enclosure. Now in this case, it's providing sort of security, so there is that secure sort of enclosure where people can live and sleep in the night, but also it's sort of creating a microclimate. So by creating this little huddle, you protect from the hot winds, and you have planting within that creates this sort of an oasis, and so it's again creating a sort of a precinct or a sort of a space within a larger kind of a more harsh kind of climate, a sort of an oasis within. So so we've sort of we're working on a project in Shirohi in Rajasthan, and it's a school, and some of these thoughts were in the back of our mind, and we were looking at how do you sort of create a cluster of buildings in say a 4-acre site, and so one of this we have this idea. Typically when you do an institutional project, you sort of deal with the edge of the property. How do you make it sort of disappear? Because there's something very banal and about this compound wall which everybody wants. And then there's also these all kinds of these utility elements, like there are roads, there's parking, there's utility structures which come as part of any campus plan. So what we did was we create this precinct within a precinct. So that pink layer which you see is a sort of a peripheral layer within which there is an inner precinct which is sort of pedestrian. And as you can see in that section, so when you sort of enter the inner precinct, you sort of it's like a bowl which you sort of enter, and as your eye level goes lower, that peripheral sort of layer disappears, and what you're connecting with is actually the landscape beyond, which is the agricultural landscape and the hills in the distance. So this is sort of an example of really, an idea which is sort of taken from something which is quite different, examples which I showed you earlier, but applied in a very specific way, in a very practical solution for a sort of a master plan. And what this does is that when you remove all those elements like roads and parking, and from the inner sanctum of the campus, you create this sort of slightly. So what you see is this the architecture and then the landscape. So what is, and that sort of connection which creates a strong sense of place. Hopefully. Then of course, we've all been fascinated by streets, and this idea of, especially the experience of a street in an old city, a traditional city like Ahmedabad. We have so many examples in Rajasthan, Jaisalmer, and so this is something which, when you have that kind of experience, it stays within you and becomes part of your system. And there's a loss of that kind of experience in our cities today because of the kind of building typology and the bylaws that we follow. So what you have is a domination of the very vehicular space and a dispersal of buildings which become sort of objects. So there's this sort of loss of this experience, and then, but within the kind of projects you work, sometimes try to recreate the whole experience of the street. So, this was actually, that is of course, again, examples from Rajasthan, Jaisalmer on the left. And a couple of months back, I was traveling in Rajasthan. I spent a couple of days in Bundi, which is just 2 hours from here. And it's a beautiful town. And what's also, so one is this experience of the street as a climatic element, as a social space, as a piece of architecture. But also, I think what I found interesting in Rajasthan was the relationship between settlements and the landscape. So there's always settlement which is nestled in the hills, like Jaipur is an example, it's encircled by hills. Or you look at all these little towns which you see along the way, they're sort of in some way connected with the hills. And yeah, so Bundi is like that, and then you see, sometimes when you are in the street, you sort of see across and you see glimpses of the landscape. So there's this combination of this intensity of the urban experience as well as that release when you get a vista to the landscape. So this was one proposal that they ran for CMC level in Chittoor. This was with Makalo Associates, not here. But it was a proposal that we did. And there was a similar condition of a hill, and we sort of wrapped the entire hospital and residential sort of institutional campus around the hill with the main street and these kind of cross streets. So it's a sort of an adaptation again of an urban kind of fabric to an institutional sort of a solution, where the street and the idea of the street structures the master plan. But again, the combination of the red line, which is the intense urban sort of feel, with the cross axes which connect with the landscape. So that kind of relief like you have in the hill towns in Italy, again when you walk around the streets and then you get those glimpses of the landscape. So this was when you were adding a floor to a building, and we deal with the corridor, and in modern practice with the efficiencies required, the W corridor is something you can't escape. And so we were adding a floor to a building, which was in IIT, Bangalore. And so we added a top floor to this building. We created this sort of street which winds around, using it's an adaptation from the old structure. So the street that winds through and becomes a sort of interactive space between these incubation labs and the students with the classrooms. And then again, if you see those, these terraces that you sort of come across, which here, which lead out, and again, as I move through the street, you sort of get the glimpses of the landscape, which connects to what's beyond. Then, of course, this idea of the scales within scales. You have this idea of a vehicular shrine within a shrine, and again from Hawa Mahal, these beautiful multiple scales within a building. You have these larger scale of the palace, but you have a smaller scale of these little alcoves, little pavilions, which it's a wonderful play. And a modern, of course, example from the Miller's building in Ahmedabad. And then so this idea of a building within a building was explored in this healthcare center which we did in Dharmapuri. And this is again, it's a climatic solution. It was very hot climate and you create this shaded layer around the building. But what it also does is programmatically, the inner building is sort of placed asymmetrically, and you get sort of a variety of verandas, waiting spaces for patients, public gallery space, the back corridors for doctors, and the service area, and the cavity at the top is used to run services. Again, when you work with bylaws and you get stuck with certain dimensions, like a 10 feet floor dimension, and staircase widths, which are determined by fire norms. So how do you escape from that? So one is that we try to use, so if you see that D is the standard dimension, but you use larger than and smaller than dimensions. So you break these scales down so that you have, always your eye comes to things which are smaller than that standard and also larger. So it's a way of sort of moving away from that sort of standardized experience. And of course, there will be an extension to a house where there is a perforated box which allows nature to come in. But within that, there is a smaller box which has multiple alcoves and rooms and screens which sort of open and close to allow differences in light, privacy, etc. And then, of course, the idea of facades themselves. And I'll just go through this quickly. So again, a fantastic example from the Hawa Mahal. And this idea of the veranda, which again becomes like a climatic element, is also a social space. And we've used this use the idea of a veranda in a multi-story building where you have this outer skin, which is of these metal louvers, inner facade. So it's basically a double skin facade which has varying depths, which allows sometimes only weather protection, but also become movement spaces and social spaces. And of course, another example here of these kind of facades where the compressed double layer facades with many kind of roles like security, climate protection, privacy, etc. And then last, I'll just take 30 seconds on this. It's this idea of settlements in a sort of a monsoon landscape, and this idea of raised mounds, Janapada, where you set sort of where the people set foot literally, and which accommodate these varying levels of of water during the monsoons. So this is actually close to Patna. And then of course you have as a counter to the high mounds, you also have the pits, ponds, the agricultural sort of tanks, and the sort of ponds which you see in Rajasthan also. But we were doing a museum project there in Patna in a waterlogged area. So it's basically divided into a high ground and low ground, with the building on the high ground and the sort of a park in the low ground. And what the park does is it actually accommodates varying levels of water. So it's sort of in the dry season, it's one level where we see of ponds, but it's also the water level can sort of rise. And in an extreme flood like you had in 2019, you would still have a building and the entire park would be flooded. So this is sort of a flood mitigation strategy, which again, urban flood mitigation, but which again comes from this idea of a traditional practice. And then of course the landscape itself is developed along wet-dry gradients, and so this whole thing about cultivation along those gradients. This drawing is by Anuradha Mathur. Okay, so, she is very unfortunate that she passed away, but she actually worked on this collaborative sort of project. And so this is an example at a level of how one occupies a monsoonal terrain. So that's it, yeah. So these are a couple of examples. But I think I just want to touch upon one point is that it's not necessarily a linear process that you have a sort of an inspiration or a reference and you move forward. It's actually sometimes the other way also. Sometimes you do something without thinking, but you find resonance in examples elsewhere. Thank you.
Well, yeah, so good afternoon, and thank you for having me over. I'm going to be talking today. It's nothing to do with my. We've always been talking about our projects. I'm not talking anything about my project. I'm talking about 4,000 years of legacy or 4,000 years of heritage that has been there from. Okay, so I'm talking about Iran. That's my country. India is my country, but my ancestors came from Iran. My dad came from Iran actually, and he settled down here. But then we got roots there, and I've been going up and down. I spent a lot of time as a child in Iran. So I'm talking about Yazd, which is a 4,000-year-old World Heritage UNESCO site. And it's right in the heart of the city, it's right in the heart of the country. Iran has been, invaded many times by Alexandra, you name it, the Russian invasions, the British, everything. But Yazd was right in the heart of the country, and it has been preserved as and today it's a World Heritage District. I don't know whether I'll be able to do justice in 10 minutes or 4,000 years, but that's so Iran. Yazd is basically a it's a desert, and there's no water out there. So it was on the Silk Route, and the water was brought to Yazd from the city of Isfahan, which has got most of the water, and it was brought through canals, what we call as qanat, that was about 40 to 15 meters below the ground, and this was built right 4,000 years ago, and today it's still operational. So that's very commendable work. Now this is Yazd, and this is the heritage crescent, the blue line what you see, and then the red zones are the areas which have been preserved, and you cannot touch anything. Nobody can change the skyline, nobody can change any buildings without the consent of the heritage committee that is there. So there's the government as well as there are architects on the panel who do not allow, you got to go through that. Basically, Yazd or Iran was a Zoroastrian country. Later on, when Islam came in, we all got converted, and but then we got still a lot of the Zoroastrian fire temples and everything. So I'll just run through all this because we have a lot of time. So basically, all the buildings that were there, they've been transformed and they've been used into different uses today. So we've got the hammams, we've got restaurants in the hammams, and they preserve the old structure, preserve the sanctity of the building, and they've converted. We have the water tanks, what we call the water tanks that are there, the cisterns that are there under the ground when the water comes from Isfahan to Yazd. So we've got a lot of these water tanks, and they've been converted, some of them have been converted into water museums. So so there's a committee which allows you to doesn't allow you to do a lot of things. So there's a protection which is there. That is the main center, what we call it the Fahed Pune. That is the district which is that's an aerial view of it. This city was built with all mud bricks, sun-dried mud bricks, and most of the houses, because that's the city's overview, most of these houses are built with, since there is this, we get a lot of sandstorms, so we do not have any windows opening outside. The other thing about the houses that are there, they are all built with about 24 inches to 30 inches of walls, so they can contain the heat as well as the when it's winter, because the desert climate without very cold, so it contains the heat and the mud bricks. So this is some of the houses that you see. There's a courtyard in the center, and we have the wind catchers, and that's how you get the cool air. That was the air conditioning system. I'll just show you later. This is one of the main city centers, and it's been maintained since then. This is one of the Zoroastrian temples from way back. So there are some of these big domes which have been done and they still are there. And there are all these light wells, so they bring light into the house and into the buildings. This is a typical wind catcher, and so that brings the air, and there's a very nice system. It doesn't allow the sand to come to the house, but it gets the wind and it goes over a bed of water, and then it comes into the house, so you get a very nice environment. That was the old air conditioning system. This place is very close to me because my dad used to have a supermarket in this premises. This was originally a bus stand and a caravan sarai, which the owners took it over and they converted it into, it's a 5-star hotel. Now it's the only 5-star hotel in the city. This is the traditional gym that was there. So we call it the Zurkhune, and now today it's a tourist destination. So people work out over here, but then you see tourists come and they sit down and you can experience the practicing, the guys practicing. This is the Masjid al-Jami, what is the main mosque of the city. So this is, I'm going to just take a project which is converted from a single family home into a boutique hotel. So if you look at it, when you enter, that's the entrance of the house, you get it. All the houses had a courtyard, and this is a winter house, and then that's the summer house. So when the sun moves, so in winter you use certain rooms which you get sunlight into the room, so you get, because there was no air conditioning, there was no heaters. So these were the heaters, and that was planned in that way so that you get, the room temperature is maintained and the sun comes into that room, and then there was a winter house. So, and you see the walls, they are 2 feet, 3 feet, depending on the thing. And none of the windows, none of the houses had window. So inward looking. That's underground. Every house had an underground, and so the underground was like a cooler. It was like the refrigerator. So we used to store all the, like we used to get water in that time, and we used to put it in the basement. All the foods were kept in, so there's a seasonal food, and we used to get there and put them in the basement, and it used to remain cool and it used to remain fresh. So we used to use it in winter. That's another part of the house, and that's the basement. So there are 2 houses, and this has been taken and converted into a boutique hotel. So when completed, this is the entire property. I must say thanks to my friends who shared all these plans. His name is Said Abbasi. So that's how it looks when it's completed after the disclosure. That was the courtyard in the center, how it looked before the restoration, and that's how it looks today after it's completed as a boutique hotel. It's known as the Sarai and here. That's the room. That's a restaurant. That's a good use of the property. So these are the light wells that are there. You can see them from the terrace. You get light into the houses. That's the restaurant after completion, nighttime view. And that's one of the rooms after it's been restored. Restaurants. So this is the wind catcher, and just explaining to you how it happens. So there's a wind inlet, it comes down, there's a water bed, that's a pool, it goes over the water and then comes into the houses and then is extracted from the outlet dome. So there's full circulation like when we do the stack effect in a lot of buildings today. This was done 4,000 years ago. That's a carpet store in the Boutique Hotel. That's a balcony on the room. And that's a Persian night that they have, they sing they read the halfways and share these things. There are particular nights when they spend. That's an alley. So if you look at these alleys also, all these alleys were very narrow. They were mostly covered. They had buttresses supporting each other, and so that the sandstorm when it used to come, it was protected. That's Wakir and Alabama. What we call is the Wakirs are there. They take the wind catches. They take the wind down into the water tanks. These are water tanks which the canals brought into the city, and it was stored over there. And from there, it was people used to go and collect the water from there. So a lot of the houses had accesses to these bars. You used to go down and you used to pick up the water and come out. So that's a typical section. How you see the you go down the steps and the water gets cooled over there. Now this one of them has been converted into a museum, and that's something about the culture, the food, and that's it.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Architect Rita Soh.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. As we said, I'm the last speaker. It's very challenging after such wonderful presentation by the four speakers before me. So, same time. All right. Let's. Alright, this, I think Salil did a good thing on songwriting. Early on I thought architecture, transformation, architecture. So I thought coming together in transformation, perhaps we need to know where the context is. And for me, the context which I took reference was past, present, and future. When we mind our past, we discern the current, present, and then we prepare for the future. Alright, quick overview of what I'm going to do very fast. Basically, our Asian diverse and rich heritage. I just finished my term as a president, so obviously, the last 25 years I've been working on Asia. I use that as a reference point. And our current challenges, impact, especially on climate change, Salil has already wonderfully summarized. And the other thing is our aspiration and our commitment to creation care, the care of planet Earth. And of course, just a very quick summary. Journey in Singapore, our conservation and restoration, and particularly on my own project. This is just, I think you know all that. In view of time, I just want to highlight that in Asia, we are a grouping of 22 Asian countries, architects, and one China, India, Indonesia, Pakistan, one of the many 22 members. And indeed, you can see so much of our heritage, real heritage, natural heritage are there. So therefore, it is very important for us to mind our historical built heritage. I believe Asia will publish Vernacular Wisdom, the book. They will try to summarize and distill from what we've learned from the past. And especially I have to highlight that when I first came to Jaipur almost 15 years ago, I was totally amazed when I visited the National Palace. There's so much things to learn from them. And I guess that in Asia, Qazi Arif is here, but we have actually compiled the first beginning of this vernacular wisdom. And because of global warming, I think Salil has mentioned it, we are now suffering unprecedented impact of climate change onto our global platform. And because we are in the construction industry, we play a very pivotal role in making sure that we do not destroy our planet. Part of the reason why we need to conserve our heritage so that we don't build unnecessarily. Yeah, so on that note, just to give you a summary, our World Heritage Site taken from China, India, North, and Southeast Asia, very quick snapshot. We have thousands of known projects, but yet there are some unknowns. So the premise for me here is to just try to summarize our major concerns. Why are we, I think my colleagues have done a wonderful job on looking at the transformation, but I thought the call for us is to look at our heritage and if possible do a very sustainable way of looking at our heritage building. They may be built long time ago, but they can be repurposed. I think some of the topics we talk about, repurposing our own heritage and making it meaningful for the future use. So that's where I've summarized mining our past and then discerning the present and preparing for the future. This is our commitment. I think in view of time, I'm not going to do it. In Singapore's journey, I just like to highlight that we are a very, very small country, very, very small. And to illustrate, I just need to highlight that in order for us to do a very good program, there is a need for a framework of policies and guidelines towards conservation, restoration, and the retrofit of heritage buildings and structures. Yeah. So then you also need the other portion of it, which is governed and assisted by government agencies to help structure the implementation, and of course recognition of good projects done, and also some special economic incentives to recognize good effort. Yeah. So this is Singapore at DAS now. Many of you probably have been to Singapore many times, but we are a city-state, very small, 720 square kilometers, very, very small. But with it, we have, over the last 30 years, we have conserved about 7,000 heritage structures, yeah? And I think we are trying to do more for the post-independence structure. So on this part, I'd just like to highlight to you, we are a microcosm of different diversity in terms of race and religions and culture. Just to highlight that when I grew up in the 60s, this is what I grew up with. This is a landscape, many of you probably have not seen it in Singapore. This was a public housing, and now this is a city state, all right? And we have got the wonderful things that you have seen. Many of you have visited Singapore. But just to share that conservation and restoration of our built heritage goes beyond keeping the facade. So it has to keep the inherent spirit of the original and beyond of this architecture. And it also requires a deep appreciation and understanding of the buildings that we have. And also it requires good management practice. Yeah. Fundamentally, retention, restoration, and repair, and of course, thorough research, which many of you are aware. And we also employ a top-down approach, and at every stage of conservation is recorded. Now, I just wanted to share with you, I think many of you have seen this. This was an old Parliament House as well as a Supreme Court. I think in early 2010, there was a call for repurposing this particular two disparate building, and we had called an international competition, design competition. I was honored to be on the jury panel. So this is an old building, as you said here, with a City Hall, Supreme Court, totally diverse in architectural style. And this is what we have basically creating and weaving the narrative of the past into the present. So what we have done, I just want to give you a very quick snapshot. The interior is configured to be a national gallery. So there is, and this is by the way worn by famous French architect, Jean-Francois, who came and stood in the loop of the project. Very cleverly, as you mentioned, you see the two buildings together, instead of putting the main entrance anywhere of the two buildings, the narrow passage in the center, you delightfully created a very delicate structural, like a lacy structure that signifies the entrance into the gallery. Alright, this is some of the internal structures that we conserve as well as showcase, so that we weave our heritage from our past. I mean, some of them were structures where you keep the image because it's important. So we kept some of the structures to showcase the past. This is again now the current structure. And just two quick examples of my own conservation. This is, in Singapore, shop houses is ubiquitous in the sense that it's very prevalent. And many a times we use the shop houses for residential use. This is the one that we create and use it as a hotel. So you see the forecourt, the individual units were all created in hotel rooms. This was done 20 over years ago when I was a young architect. Some of the examples. And this is a courtyard we create as part of the rooms. This is the courtyard area between the rooms. And then the last project that I did about 8 years ago, the conservation of a Catholic church. Again, it's done in French Gothic style in the 1870s. and very, very bad condition when we saw it. It's in very bad shape. But in churches in Singapore, it caters to the migrant society, so he has expanded 3 times. This is just to showcase to you what we have done to restore and bring it back to its needs, to its parishness. So the internal has been reconfigured, very minimally brought in the latest in terms of technology and in terms of the environment for air conditioning and for sound acoustics. So we kept most of the structures. We restored the what you call it, the windows. Those are very, very nice window panels that was purchased from France. Again, because it is a church, we kind of resurrected the tombstone because most Catholic churches has the tombstone of the first priest embedded down in the church. So we kind of cleaned it up and actually brought it up so that it's part of the aisle, towards the high altar. And this is the night shot. And that's all. That's the end. Thank you very much. I just wanted to highlight that it's a fantastic effort by Rajasthan chapter, and I think my speakers have actually showed a very interesting dimension to the way we can repurpose, bringing this the vernacular materials that we have. But my call is, as architects, as stakeholders of the built environment, if we do not put our foot in and try and conserve some of the very old buildings, there will be nothing left for us. I think that's the reason why I'm saying that we have to discern what is in the future, what is in the present now, try and keep them. We may not have good ideas what to do with it, but do not destroy it, because in time to come, you will find the usage for it. So on that note, I'd like to call on all architects really to mind your heritage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you. You said your presentation. Thank you, and initially on the start, thinking on the topic, and where we reached today, the kind of presentation we, literally gone across Asia, I think. It's very motivating. Thank you to all the speakers for taking this topic going. So it's difficult to summarize, let's say, where we reach. So have general questions for all the speakers. So this whole idea of transformation, and the fact is that we all know, Rita showed the last bit of slide about Asia as a continent. This continent will transform. It's suddenly getting economically stronger, moving money comes in people's hands, their aspirations change. So how do we make sure that when you sort of, on one hand say, that preserve heritage, there is a demand obviously for new buildings, and maybe cities being looked at. How do we preserve the DNA of our cities to ensure that this transformation sort of remains valid? I mean, from what I understand, from what I remember of biology, even in the caterpillar, before the butterfly, the DNA doesn't change. So it can be completely physically transformed, but in essence it remains the same animal in the same. But I mean, from what we are seeing today, in the way our cities are growing, it's not, it's just completely being. Yeah, so if you want to pick up from what we see this as 5 to 20 years down the line, how do we see this moving forward?
Hello. Yeah. I think it's always been a challenge for most countries to try and keep your heritage building, because it never seemed to be seen as development. As most countries develop, like you said, they want to build new buildings, and old buildings are not good showcase. But I think we need to remember that we have to remember our past, right? And past buildings are not necessarily terrible buildings. In fact, they are very, very long buildings. We need to find a new use for those buildings, alright, and restore them to glory. But like I said, it's difficult, alright, because most government would like to move areas and they like to do development. And I believe that's where architects and planners come in. Because we have been trained, we have the foresight to see the possibilities and the potential of us using the museum. I think you spoke about missing area. Yours 4,000 years, I mean 200 years. But really, I think that the ability for us to, as architects, to really campaign, and not just campaign among the converted, but really lobby your governments, lobby your government departments, and really put forward a master plan to help you preserve the heritage. I think that's what I felt it could be done.
I think that one aspect is quality. If something is of good quality, it lasts. And that's why sometimes these old buildings survive for such a long time. And I think it's interesting also of the kind of plans that they have. But usually it's a very non-functional, it's the opposite of your bubble diagram functioning here. It's a grid which can sort of adapt itself to multiple. So that's why it's very often sort of easier to adapt old buildings and to modern ones, to accommodate new programs. And so I think it's this aspect of quality lasts. And I think that as somebody said, it's not good because it's old, but it's old because it's good.
I think it's a major challenge, trying to strike a balance between how to maintain the old buildings and reuse them. And with the growing population, land is not being, manufactured anymore. So, where do you take the call? The population is increasing, you need more land, land prices are going up. How do you reutilize the land that is there, and how you, not build, not destroy the heritage? So it's a major challenge. I don't think anybody can answer that question.
I think it's one of the challenges. Yes, we should not get being pragmatic, too romantic about saying that we have to preserve. Of course, we should preserve. But there is, it's an escapable thing about the pressure of sort of reusing land, because you have more requirements, and just purely population are growing, all that sort of thing. So, rebuilding or building new, but with the knowledge of what the old was, is, in my view, in a way, linked that needs to. It's not just about architects doing it. I think perhaps we need to perhaps be more, like Rita saying, approach the government and just gently be, educate clients, for them to appreciate the fact that there is perhaps the requirement of which I'm trying to say, that keeping the DNA, because we can't pretend that new redevelopment or new development not going to happen. Suddenly, like say in India, we have this place now, Shanghai or Dubai, or the kind of cities. Yeah. So that's the whole point of where do you, because also the demand comes from impatient capital, as it's called. Clients come to pressure to say, I want a glass building, and thank you for the sponsor of this event that we've seen a lot of glass buildings at the beginning. So it's you can't pretend that that's not going to happen. So how do we keep the balance without getting too romantic either way?
So my point is, I think we look at the buildings, not necessarily on its own. Right. I think we do not need to look at our heritage building necessarily on its own. Alright, even if it's a small building, you look at it in a collective whole. If you are looking at development of the city, for example, you could make that building as part and parcel of a program that fits the city. I mean, the worst thing that an architect will do is say, I have an old building and I want to build a hospital within it. Hospital requirement will never be able to fit within a carcass like an old building. So therefore, we need to creatively think outside the box. Can I find another piece of land adjacent to it? I build a hospital, and this could be a program to refit the old building such that it could be a place where they meet patients. It could be a public front of the hospital. I'm just saying that out of the fact that we are looking at the context of the development as old, do not necessarily restrict our view of the old building to what is purpose that was built before. So maybe that is an angle to look at. Yeah.
So I just want to add something here. My house in the same precinct, my dad's house. So it was my dad, two brothers, and a sister. So that house was an ancestral house. Now, when the family grew, the house remained the same. We're not going to expand on that. So, of course, my dad started buying all of them, and he maintained the house. But it becomes such a challenge. Now, today when I take my kids out there, they're not ready to stay there because what happens is you don't have air conditioning. You don't have heaters. So we just put in, some kind of a, retrofit we're doing and we're using it. But it's a big challenge using that house. So, there's no answer to it. How do you use it? So we're trying our best, we put in some, air conditioning, but when you place the air conditioning, it's a big problem. Sanitation has been introduced, everything is there, but I don't know where to answer it. It's very nice, it's like a museum, it's a beautiful house, but it's not easy.
I just read back. Quickly, I've been told we're running out of time. Anybody in the audience want to Yatin? One more.
I'm from Bangkok, Thailand, and thank you very much for starting for moderating and all the speakers. Very inspiring presentation. Okay, I would like to ask perhaps our leaders, President of RDC Rita and also Salil. We have seen you guys as a leader in architecture, talking about architecture transformation. What do you think is the most critical thing that we should pass on to our future architects? What do you think should be the most critical part that we should change or add into curriculum? Especially, you have just talked about maybe how to think out of the box or whatever factors that change every day. So maybe I'd like to hear from your opinion. Thank you very much.
Really interesting question. I don't know whether everybody heard us. What can be introduced in the curriculum in the schools, which can perhaps is that right? So that we can probably the awareness increases and the sort of empathy increases for this sort of thing.
I'm not an authority on ancient architecture. I think, but my point is that I think many of our buildings that was built many years ago has got very basic general principles of science part of it. I mentioned I was here in Jaipur some years ago. I went to the Emerald Palace, and I'm just sharing the way it's the corridor is dark, and then they have this mirror that was fractured and they embedded on the wall, and every little alcove, maybe about 3 meters down, you have a little candle. So it's amazing that by lighting the candle, you kind of light up the entire corridor, entire tunnel. So to me, those basic principles, I would say, it's like your vernacular wisdom. Our ancestors have tried and trusted many of these so-called building science that we talk about, yeah? And we are now projecting, like my country called the Green Rating Tools Green Mark. You have the LEED program and all that. It's just that we have never verbalized those concepts in our ancient architecture. But the principles are very much embedded in our old architecture. So my point is, as part of Asian architectural fraternity, we should go into digging out of this vernacular wisdom and perhaps let our students understand that these principles can be employed even in the current modern architecture. That's what I want to say.
There's one fear that I sort of have. There's the problem of plenty versus necessity being a mother of invention. Perhaps, all those years ago, we were constrained with technology, or purely like in India, your first 50 odd years, we perhaps had no money. So a lot of this inventiveness, sort of, you had to be inventive to find solutions. Whether it was the old sort of even public buildings in India, or 200 years ago, where you didn't have electricity, but you had sort of this palace to light up, and people. Now, there perhaps is a problem of plenty. You suddenly can, get everything. So how do you put this balance and where do you, how do you tell people that you should not, for example, have a slightly fancy building? It's very difficult for you today. 50 years ago, you didn't have the money to afford it at all. So now it's the challenge which, when you say how do you teach students, it's like, trying to tell students, initially we used to all be told, learn to sharpen a pencil. Today the guy says, why should I use a pencil? I'm going to go on the software straight away. I don't need to learn to draw. So that's the whole point. I mean, I'm trying to say, how do you sort of keep this balance of between this, and what's available?
I think, I'm assuming there are quite a lot of students attending this program. I think there are two key things. Number one, when you enroll for an architecture program, it's not necessary you need to sit and do design building. There are plenty of options which an architecture program exposes you to. So be aware of it, be conscious of it. Design is not the only task. The end goal of an architecture program is number one. I mean, studying in Darbar, studying in Bangalore, I had an opportunity to work with Nitya. She used to teach theory of architecture. It was an elective. She taught a group of us how to read an architectural criticism and beautiful exercise. So the options are phenomenal, that's number one. And for the rest who choose to pursue architecture with the love of God, do it with compassion, do it with love. You will spend your lifetime on it. So yeah.
Simply first to continue, I think let's teach student to take an informed decision. So
Mike.
Binary, and then this is what I was about to just bring about that, cities have always grown, densities have increased, we've built more and more, but is it suddenly the planet has changed in just last 20 years that we feel there's a disjunct? If you see old Jaipur, old Ahmedabad, we invented wonderful typology called row houses, which was a good adaptation of bungalow and a traditional row house. We achieved the same density, even the old city has 2.7 FSI, which even legally, except for exceptional buildings, we don't have. So to think that there's suddenly a need for more different typology, I'm not too sure. It's probably, like you say, the liberty that we have taken to just bring in for a height, something that not necessarily one was called for, and second, now that perpetuates. But I'm very sure as the fashion is also going to fade out. Sometimes something new catches your attention. But how many of some of these so-called new buildings we look for even a third time? So if we go to the basics, roots, and understand what is the true DNA, that need not be flouted. We have a good study of where actually, Ahmedabad, till that ring road, you don't see really that disjunct, and it's been just last 15 or 18 years. And now suddenly on the other side of the outskirts should be actually low run, is now always the high rise. So city has grown 70 kilometers, and yet it is now going vertical. So we have not achieved either of it, neither a compact city nor a kind of sprawl of bungalows. So I think that's where somewhere we need to have that kind of a study analysis to really understand how much or more is really required and what is the best way that to achieve that. I say that 2.5, 2.7 FSI is very achievable with low rise, high density with terraces and all that. Actually, we should not question the new building to build, but to take a liberty, there's no outdoor space, no community sense between the neighbors. So I think it's that quality of life that old cities or previous built form had, has our new buildings brought that. So I think that's the real question.
So on that note, thank you for completely your time. Can I take one question? Or are we done? We're done. I will listen to the lady. Oh.
Hi, this is Ashutosh. I just want to share a concern with the speakers. Hardly 500 meters from this hotel, there is a building, probably largest in Jaipur, which flouts all the norms. It flouts the text, it flouts the climate, it flouts whatever we are looking at the Rajasthan architecture. And this is probably the biggest building of Jaipur. What should be done when the buildings like this come up? And the society looks up to these buildings as a sign of success without it.
That's the point I was making. I mean, perhaps we need to get on our feet. I think Habib said something references about this earlier, that we need to stop being in silos, architects talking to architects, do it that much so that we can move ahead. We need to go out into the public domain and talk to people who take those decisions and try and figure out, because it's not something for, you can't go and hold a dharna in front of that. The whole city will laugh. They don't understand why you don't like this building that they all love. So we've got to perhaps be able to educate them through our own means, the IIA, council, whatever, of being able to do this. We've got to do the outreach ourselves. Otherwise we are irrelevant. We're just making ourselves more and more irrelevant. Nobody calls an architect on TV or an interview. If there's pollution in Delhi, they have doctors on the panel. If there's a problem with urban something in the city, nobody calls an architect for it. So it's something that probably we are making ourselves irrelevant. We're going to stand up for what we should be doing. So anyway, on that note, thank you everybody. Thank you for panel. Thank you everyone.
To present a small token of gratitude, may I please invite Architect Amit Gehlot and Architect Rajendra on stage to felicitate our speakers for the session.